First practice after the crash. The coach blew the whistle to start a 2-goalie drill. Bob Froese skated to one end of the ice, and the other end was completely empty. That was the moment he realized Pelle wasn't coming back. He had been a backup his whole career, and Philadelphia had just handed him the hardest job in hockey. Bob Froese's life in the weeks and years after that morning traces back to a place the hockey world had almost no reason to remember. He was born in St. Catharines, Ontario on June 30th, 1958, the middle child of Frank and Agnes Froese. That's where hockey started. What set him apart as a kid had nothing to do with the position he played. It was his faith. Bob was a devout Christian in a dressing room culture that ran on the opposite values. The swearing, the drinking, the casual cruelty that kept teenage hockey players bonded to each other. He kept his faith quiet. He let the game speak first. He was drafted in the 10th round, 160th overall by the St. Louis Blues in 1978. A 160th overall pick in the late 1970s was barely a pick at all. A name buried near the bottom of a draft that ran more than a dozen rounds deep. The kind of selection teams forget they ever made. St. Louis never even offered him a contract. He bounced through the lower minor leagues for several seasons, the kind of stops where goalies either disappear or sharpen. In 1981, the Philadelphia Flyers signed him as a free agent. No bonus, no headline, no fanfare. A name added to an organizational depth chart in a city that already had a goalie of the future on his way from Stockholm. His NHL debut came on January 8th, 1983. He was 24 years old, which is older than most rookies are by the time they reach the league. He earned his first NHL shutout in his third career game. What happened the following season is the kind of footnote hockey historians sometimes pull out and look at with confusion. In 1982-83, Bob Froese set a rookie record. He opened his career with a 12 wins and a tie across his first 13 games before he lost a single one. No goalie in the history of the league had ever opened a career that way, a record that would stand for more than a decade. Almost nobody in Philadelphia talked about it. By then, the story had already been decided. Pelle Lindbergh was the future, and Bob Froese was the man waiting his turn. The numbers across the two seasons they shared a crease tell a quieter story. Froese posted a 2.51 goals against average and a .910 save percentage. Pelle posted 3.0 and .898. By every objective measure, Bob Froese was the better goaltender. Mike Keenan started Pelle anyway. The Flyers never explained it, and the writers never pressed. The system had picked its man, and the numbers were not going to change it. The better goalie sat, and none of it mattered because the story had already been decided without him. Inside the room, the two of them were not enemies. Their relationship was cordial, competitive in the way two professionals in the same position have to be. In the weeks before the crash, they had begun making real efforts to grow closer, a friendship that had not existed for most of their time as teammates. That proximity is what made what come next worse than anyone outside the locker room ever understood. November 13th, 1985, 3 days after the wall on Summerdale Road. Bob Froese sat in front of reporters at the Spectrum and said one sentence nobody who heard it ever quite forgot. "I can't be Pelle Lindbergh. I can only be Bob Froese." He said it under impossible pressure. Asked to take the ice in 4 days for a city that had just lost the best goalie in the world. He said it without trying to claim the throne. He said it like a confession. Then his body broke before he could even start. In practice, before the first game back, Bob pulled his groin. The opponent that night was Edmonton, the same Oilers who had ended Philadelphia's Stanley Cup dream 6 months earlier. The first night, the city would look to its new goalie, and Bob Froese physically could not be in the net. Darren Jensen got the start instead. What he did when he came back is the part of the story almost nobody talks about anymore. When he came back, Bob led the NHL in shutouts with 5. He shared the William Jennings Trophy with Jensen for the fewest goals allowed by any tandem in the league. He was named to the second All-Star team. And when the league office counted the Vezina Trophy ballots, the award given by NHL general managers to the best goaltender in hockey, Bob finished second, losing by 2 votes. He posted the best numbers of his career in the worst circumstances of his life, his first year as a starter, replacing a man he had only just begun to know. In January of 1986, Bob played in the NHL All-Star Game. The starter, by fan vote, was Pelle Lindbergh. The league had no rule for what to do with a dead man voted in to start. Bob took the Wales Conference net in his place. The building applauded. Years later, he said it was one of the strangest moments of his life, being cheered for a job he had not asked for in a uniform that still belonged in everyone's memory to another man. The Vezina went to John Van Beesbrook of the New York Rangers. Inside the Philadelphia locker room and across the league, a number of voices said quietly that Bob had deserved it outright. The hockey writers who covered that ballot have offered an explanation over the years that nobody on the inside wanted to say out loud while the season was happening. The grief surrounding the Flyers was visible from the press box. And when general managers around the league marked their ballots, that grief seemed to follow Bob's name. A city in mourning, a goalie posting career numbers, and the trophy going elsewhere. The 1985-86 Philadelphia Flyers finished the regular season with 110 points and the best record in the Wales Conference. The team they drew in the first round of the playoffs was the New York Rangers, who had finished 32 points behind them in the standings. On paper, the series was not supposed to be close. The Flyers were being measured against the Stanley Cup, not against the team across the river. Game 1 at the Spectrum ended 6-2 in favor of the Rangers. Van Beesbrook made 31 saves at one end of the ice. Bob Froese gave up 6 at the other end. The building that had cheered him onto the ice in January, in Pelle's spot, turned on the result before the third period was over. Game 2, the Flyers outshot the Rangers 44-22 and won by a single goal. Every shot that didn't find the net for Philadelphia was now a conversation about the goaltender at the other end. Van Beesbrook was carrying his team, and the narrative set itself in stone. Every save he made built the case. Every goal Bob gave up confirmed it. The series went 5 games. The Rangers won it in 5. Van Beesbrook was the story across the entire hockey world. Bob Froese became, in the days that followed, the reason the best team in the Wales Conference had been knocked out. He was described in print as outplayed by his Vezina rival. The Flyers front office said almost nothing publicly. Mike Keenan said even less. The decision about what came next was already being made in rooms Bob was not invited to. People close to that team, asked years later, used some version of the same phrase. Emotionally and mentally drained. 5 months after the funeral in Stockholm, skating onto an ice surface where the man in the team photograph was no longer there. No one in the front office said that publicly during the playoffs. No one stood at a podium and explained the obvious. That the team Philadelphia watched in April was not the team that played in October. And that what looked like a goaltending collapse was a locker room running on fumes. And it was Bob Froese's job to carry that grief into every game. And it was Bob Froese's reputation that absorbed the loss. October of 1986. The Flyers opened training camp with a 22-year-old goaltender named Ron Hextall, drafted 4 years earlier, who never started a regular season NHL game. Keenan handed him the job in the first week of camp. Bob Froese, runner-up for the Vezina 12 months earlier, Jennings winner, second-team All-Star, was told he was the backup. The shinier option had arrived, and the system did what it always does. He appeared in 3 games to open the season. He won all 3. It changed nothing. There is a detail about that stretch that's worth sitting with. Every record, every honor, every moment the league had offered Bob Froese across his career had come with something attached. A caveat, a shared credit, an asterisk that arrived quietly after the fact. The Jennings was shared with Jensen. The Vezina went to someone else by 2 votes. Even the starting job came with a dead man's name on it. The pattern was consistent enough that you stopped being able to call it bad luck. Around Halloween, Bob walked into the office and asked to be traded. The quote he gave reporters afterward was the most honest thing he had said publicly since the morning of November 10th. "I wanted to play. If you ask my teammates and a lot of people around the league, I was a guy who could play. Mike Keenan was the one guy that I didn't have a great relationship with." A year of biting his tongue ended in 2 sentences. On December 18, 1986, the Philadelphia Flyers traded Bob Froese to the New York Rangers for a defenseman named Shel Samuelson and a second-round pick. The Rangers, the team that had ended his playoff run 8 months earlier. His new backup was now John Van Beesbrook, the man who had taken the Vezina out of his hands and the Stanley Cup chance out of his city. The system, in the end, didn't even bother to send him somewhere quiet. It sent him to the address of every wound it had left on him. Bob played 4 seasons in New York. He finished his career with 128 wins. He was never a starter again in the way the Flyers had needed him to be in 1985. Never again the man a city was leaning on. 4 seasons in New York. Back up to the man who took his Vezina. The story had already passed him. On November 28, 1987, in a game against the New York Islanders, Dennis Potvin's shot hit the post. Brent Sutter tried to clear the rebound, and the puck slid the length of the ice into the empty net. The scorer, believing Froese had touched Potvin's shot moments earlier, credited him with the goal. For a moment, only the second goalie in NHL history to score one. Then, Froese told reporters he had never touched the puck. The league reviewed it and handed the credit to defenseman David Shaw. Even that taken back. And this time, Froese was the one who gave it away. It was the strangest footnote in a career full of them. A man the league kept finding ways to acknowledge sideways and then unacknowledge. Never the trophy, never the moments, not even the fluke. He retired in 1990. And then he did something almost no one in the hockey world saw coming. Bob Froese became a pastor. He leads Faith Fellowship Church in Clarence, New York. He has said Pelle's death split his life into 2 separate stories, a before and an after. Before the crash, he has said, he was a hockey player who professed Christianity. After it, he became a Christian who happened to play hockey. The faith he had carried quietly through every dressing room of his playing career, the part of him he had kept in reserve while the game took everything else, became the thing he built the rest of his life on once the game was finished with him. Philadelphia handed Bob Froese the hardest job in hockey. Replace a dead legend, carry a grieving city, and when one playoff series went sideways, they used it as the reason to erase him. The system needed a scapegoat more than it needed a goaltender. Decades later, Bob still runs the same 2-goalie drill that broke him open the first morning without Pelle. He says he doesn't blame any of them. That might be the most revealing thing about him. If this one stayed with you, the super thanks helps the channel keep digging. The next one's already in the works. Subscribe, please, before you go.